Swept overboard at the rail on December 24th in 1853. Now, in a bad storm. Now, you'd wonder why they were at the rail in 1853 in a bad storm. Well, the rail went, and so did 159 other people. They just took the top of the ship off. So I talked to them. I'm a newspaper reporter for the New York Times, and we got this story, and since this particular tragedy happened, we kind of report upon it because it's a lot of people went over. But anyhow, so we're talking about the SS San Francisco. Now the SS San Francisco was a ship that was going to go part of the U.S. mail system, and it came out of the system when at that time went from New York City down to the Isthmus of Panama. And you take it overland and they take it on the other side and take it up to California or San Francisco. This ship, SS San Francisco, was supposed to be that side of the movement. So maiden voyage, large ship, 285 feet, was a pretty decent size. And if you go up here, you look from the corner here where the old jail down to the church, that's about 285 feet long, and it was 41 feet wide. Had redundancy, twin boilers on it. It had other pumps that had steamers on them, so they would go and do all that. But unfortunately, that wasn't, well, it became the problem. So they just left on December 22nd. Now, Major Taylor, since he was a West Point graduate, could push people around. And so they left late. They were supposed to leave in November, but he had other things he wanted to do. So he gets there onto the ship and says, okay, Captain, you're down below. I'm taking this suite of cabins. So they're on the top deck. And they take off. They had enough food for the Army for 12 months. They had enough food for the crew and the rest of the people for 3 months, and they were transporting the 3rd Artillery Group of the U.S. Army, less 4 regiments, but they also were taking the band with them. There were no horses nor cannon going with them, so the boat wasn't carrying that cargo. But they did note the boat was a little low on the water compared to some of the other things. But again, it's first time, how many people can you put on, so and so forth. So they take off on the 22nd out of New York City, get out to around the Hatteras area on the 23rd, and the waves got bad because of the particular time frame. December, the Lapland, Newfoundland current coming down, meeting the Gulf Stream coming up and all that creates a stormy area. So they had a bad wave hit them, and they took off the sails on the front up here. Okay, they could go ahead with a steamer and then also with the sails in the back. They get about the night of the 24th, or the morning of the 24th, and the air pump breaks. Now, not a big deal. Redundancy and all that, 1 air pump. What's an air pump for on a steamer? It's to push air into the area so you have a fire. Without that, you have no fire. You have no steam, you have nothing. So it dies there. On the 24th in the morning, between 8 and 10, a large wave hits it and knocks the top of the deck off and the 2 paddle wheel covers and all the sails on the back part of the ship. So now they're dead in the water. They can't go anywhere. And as I said, 160 people went over at that time. Okay, so they hope to have somebody pick them up. Well, the Napoleon, the brig Napoleon, finds them 2 days later, and that would be the 26th. And they speak. In other words, they have those cones, and they yell at each other. But he couldn't pick anybody up because it was too bad a storm, too bad the water was too low. But he goes on up to Boston and then tells people that the SS San Francisco's in trouble. Now that's where the New York Times kind of gets into the thing. We're interested about what's going on. So we kind of start following this thing. Well, about 4 days after the accident, the bark, the Kildare, comes along. Now the Kildare is going from Louisiana up to Boston and to be refitted. It's carrying a cargo of cotton and corn and going on up to that place. Not a whole lot of water aboard. Not a whole lot of provisions, but enough to get the 25 men that was on the board to go up there. Well, they find the SS San Francisco. And they say, we'll take everybody aboard. So they got about 160 people off, and all of a sudden, the waves started to get bad again. So they stopped. And then they take a rope and tie it between the bark in the SS San Francisco overnight. The next morning, they wake up, there's a rope, the SS San Francisco. So they spend 3 or 4 days looking for the San Francisco, and they can't find it. So they then moved, they decided to go off towards the United States. Now, the understanding was, first port you find on the United States, you put in there and get rid of these people on there. Well, the captain wasn't too good a captain, and he kind of took off. And they ran into storms, and they had to get water because there was no water, and not a lot of water because they only had water enough for those people to get up to Boston, but they still got, and on the SS San Francisco, since they had all those provisions, they gave them about 5 or 6 hams, they gave them biscuits, they gave them a lot of water. So they had enough, they think, for the 160 people for, maybe a week. Okay, so San Francisco's still out there. Kildare's going that way, towards the United States. Well, fortunately, about 5 days after the incident, the ship called Three Bells, going from New York City to Glasgow, finds the SS San Francisco. But they can't take people off because it's still rough waters. The Antarctica, going from Liverpool, Glassgow's going to New York City, Liverpool's the Antarctica. The 2 ships get together and take the rest of the people off that were still living off the ship because they were losing people to the hypothermia. This happened between 8 and 9 in the morning. There were some of the people who were in their bedclothes at that time. So they were getting cold, didn't have enough clothes, and a few of the guys got into foods they shouldn't have, and the food was not good, and they died of that. Okay, so they get everybody off, sink the ship because you have a derelict out there, you want to do that. 3 or 4 days later, the Three Bells goes into New York City. About the same time, the Antarctica gets into Liverpool, and now we know that thing. Okay, unfortunately, the people on the bark are still moving along there. And they get up close to New York City, and they think the Twin Lights in New York City. But the captain doesn't want to go in there because he's afraid of Long Island. He doesn't have the maps for that area. So they decide to go back and forth a little bit. Then the crew decides, we're only going to Boston. You guys can go do what you want to do, but we're taking this ship to Boston. So they get a little further up, and they met a bark called the Lucy Thompson. They transfer the people from the SS San Francisco onto the Lucy Thompson because the people on from the San Francisco were down to a mutiny. They had to ration the water. They were cooking the corn that was part of the cargo, and they were cooking it on an open fire and eating it that way. They were sleeping on the cotton bales in the hull, and so bark's still out there. Lucy Thompson picks the people up that they met in Long Island Sound, takes them into New York City. They were met by a tugboat. The people had heard about these people coming up, and met by tugboat with clothing on it because the people on the ship did not have any other clothing rather than their nightgowns. And they got in it, and that's the story. It just starts with this. Now, there's another story if anybody wants to look at it. This is Dr. Everett, died in 1855. His daughter died in 1853 with George Taylor, and on the other side, his son died in 1854 in California, a doctor. That's got to be a story in itself, if anybody wants to look it up. Because we historians, you can get locked down those rabbit holes like you can't believe. Anyhow, that's it.